I've heard of a guy in Canada who had been sober 40 years. He was in his 70s.
No.
He was the guy in the AA group there who would show the newcomers around. Some young girls joined. He got confused. And within, he went out and started drinking with them. And within 6 months, he was dead. Imagine, 40 years sober. So there is this notion that
My God.
if you go back after, no matter how long, it's like you never stopped.
Hey everybody, my name is Angie Murenga. You're watching Just Angie. It's Mwenye Monday, and we've been doing a series on addictions, and this is the third part, so enjoy the conversation. Triggers.
Triggers. The three parts of the brain, actually four, that are involved in addiction. There's a part where I mentioned about the brain going through surges. That's called the reward pathway. And connected to the reward pathway is the part of the brain in which emotions and memories are formed and stored. And so there's a correlation in the brain to the surging of the reward pathway. There's a specific neurotransmitter called dopamine, and the memories and emotions. They're connected. And so when you encounter something that you previously connected with whatever the source of the addiction was, the reward pathway is activated even before you've done anything. But then almost you find yourself compelled to go and complete the circuit, as it were, by doing whatever it is that you do, despite all the promises to the contrary. So one of the things is you need to learn what your triggers are, and if you can avoid them,
Avoid the trigger.
Avoid the trigger, like you did.
I avoided the music, actually turned it off.
Some triggers can't be avoided. Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a place, maybe it's a thing that you need, say, for your work, or is right there in your bedroom or something. And so the next thing you need to do is learn how to manage that trigger, whatever the trigger may be.
Because it can't move.
Yeah. Say cash, for example, you need cash. Yeah. For a food addict, they need food. Maybe there are certain types of food that are worse for them, like wheat or sugar, so they know to avoid those. But there are others that they can't do without, so they have to moderate. And so they may need some sort of accountability, somebody to help them to moderate. People could be triggers. Now, some people can be avoided, but there are others that can't. Sometimes the trigger is not a positive thing, it could be a negative thing, like somebody else's anger towards me. So my wife's anger towards me, or whoever's anger, my manager's anger towards me, I can't control that. So at some point, my manager will get angry with me. So I need to train myself on how to manage that situation. But triggers are key. And next to triggers are things we call high-risk situations. So places that are not just associated with the drug use, but where actually drug use is taking place, or will lead you to going into it. Whatever your high-risk situation is, you need to identify it and see how you can avoid it if you can. The best way to manage triggers and high-risk situations is to avoid them entirely. If you can't avoid them, then learn how to manage them. I remember one time after I'd stopped drinking, I was still smoking cigarettes, and I was going through town. It was in the evening, and I only had 1,000 shillings. And I wanted to buy cigarettes, so I couldn't buy them on the streets. I had to go to a bar so I could get change. And I went to a bar which I had previously used to drink in, and they had, refurbished it. They had renovated. It was looking very nice. It used to be a fairly dingy place before. And what I recall was all these guys dressed up. It was a Friday evening, early, about 7 o'clock. They've come from work. They look very civilized, having a drink. I bought my cigarettes and I went home. No issues. But when I spoke to my AA sponsor, then sponsors like a peer mentor, about it, he said, I had no business being in a bar, come what may. I had no business being in a bar. And it was a lesson learned.
Everything.
And so I even stopped looking into bars. I used to find myself trying, as I'm passing, I'd be trying to see what's going on inside, and I'd have to force myself, not to think about what's happening there. I don't want my mind to go there because I'll start wanting whatever is going on in there.
Whatever's associated with it.
Yes. So triggers lead to craving. And although you can manage a craving and you can learn how to surf through a craving, it's best to avoid it entirely by managing your triggers. But if you do happen to fall into a craving, even that can be withstood. I'm sure you experienced withstanding craving yourself.
I'm even thinking about your wedding.
Yes.
You know, thank God you had talked. That's why people need to talk about these things. But you had shared so much, and you'd even told me that you can't even have, you know how people have white wine in a sauce.
Yeah.
So that's what I remembered. So when somebody made your communion, but they used real alcohol.
Wow.
And then they told me somewhere in the middle. So I was so like, no.
Yeah.
Like, first of all, even who does that? What do you mean you used? And I don't know why I even asked. So I was like, no, remove. And they thought I was just making a fuss for nothing. I said, take away all the alcohol because I knew for you, it's a trigger. So I know it's communion, but can't still. I think maybe I talked to you about it, then you told me or something. I can't remember. But I remember how it was a big thing. But I'm so glad that you had shared it. So in my conscience, I knew that we can't have anything that would trigger it. And for me, another thing that happened is I had fear. So I had fear to have any kind of alcohol because I was like, it's going to amsha all the.
Yes.
I had such it was a very unhealthy fear. So I thought if I have a drink, it's gonna wake everything up, and then I'm gonna go back to that cycle. So I completely avoided. I'd go into the place because, but I wouldn't. I just avoided having a drink. But after I think, I don't know, that was how, a number of years, I remember actually it was in the Holy Spirit who said, now you know you've made this one. Now this is another, I don't know, an idol now. You can have a drink. So I did. I had one, but I was very careful, took it very slowly. And I don't really need it. I can have a drink to socialize. Like I remember once being in, I think it was an army base or a base anyway, and everybody something had happened, and then you go back to the base, and then everybody's looking at me. So if I order tea, nobody can have any drinks, you know? And I could tell they are all like, now who brought the pasta?
You were the peer leader.
I was the peer leader, so I knew I had to ask for something alcohol. You should have seen everybody like breathe out, you know. So just being there, not making a religion around it. I think that's what I would say.
Well, you know, alcohol is a funny drug in that sense because there are those who are able to drink safely, so to speak.
Yes.
The Bible outlaws drunkenness. It doesn't outlaw alcohol.
Everyone knows that the first miracle that Jesus did was turning water into wine.
Although it's controversial. But,
it's controversial.
You know, because people have made a religion of it.
Yes.
But it's funny in that sense because there are those who are able to hold the liquor, as we say. They're able to drink socially. It's not a problem. And probably even the majority of people who have consumed alcohol are like that. The minority is about 15 or 20% who are unable to. And you can tell by the consequences. And they need to come to a place where they accept that and accept that they cannot drink safely because that's the issue. But with other drugs, it's not... It's a little bit different because the issue of using it socially doesn't arise. You think about heroin, or cocaine.
That one you have to go out of your way.
Or codeine, like the kids are using now, or some of the synthetic drugs like meth and so forth, or even prescription medication. All of those they have one purpose: is to get you high. And it's the highness that's a problem. So what your experience, which is, you talk about abstinence as being a goal of treatment, but another goal could be what is called harm reduction. Reduce the harm that's associated with the use. And harm reduction is promoted when either the consequences of highness per se are not too bad, or where the person shows evidence that they can regain control. But by definition, when the chemical is introduced into the brain, the addict loses control, and that's the whole point. So there are those who argue they can be taught
To control.
To control
The reaction or the effect.
and also their intake. But to me, those are not addicts. Those are people who have had problems with alcohol, whatever it is, but they're not true addicts. A true addict has lost control and they'll never regain it. Yeah, so in my view, an addict who's craving, who has tolerance, who may or may not be experiencing withdrawal, but who is using more than they can control, they call that loss of control. Such a person is not likely to benefit from harm reduction. Another aspect of harm reduction, though, is that it seeks to reduce the harm associated, not with the drug use itself, but around it. For example, injection drug users who are normally doing heroin, they might be given, say, free needles to avoid them sharing needles to cut down HIV, or given condoms, or that kind of thing. So you're not addressing the drug use itself, you're looking at the risks around it. There are those who experience that kind of remission from the drug that they lost control over, usually alcohol. As I say, alcohol is funny in this regard, but virtually any other drug, once loss of control has set in, it'll never be different. And so that is why abstinence is necessary. And I've heard of a guy in Canada who had been sober 40 years. He was in his 70s.
No.
He was the guy in the AA group there who would show the newcomers around. Some young girls joined. He got confused, and within he went out and started drinking with them. And within 6 months, he was dead. Imagine 40 years sober. So there is this notion that
My God.
if you go back after, no matter how long, it's like you never stopped. And because the disease is progressive, where you start off is like you've been drinking all through.
So my thought was true. When I was thinking, this thing is going to wake up all the other alcohol that or take me right back.
Yeah. Because what you know, and this is a medical model which looks at addiction, you know, as a physiological condition. Whatever genetic modifications happened to trigger it are still in place. So in this sense, it's all about abstinence being for life. And so recovery has got to become a lifestyle. Recovery is not something you do for a few weeks, a few months, even a couple of years, and then hope things will be okay. And in fact, that is something that trips people up. Not understanding that once you accept that you have this condition and you need to abstain, that has got to be a lifelong thing. And it's hard. Earlier you mentioned needing support. You need support in order to make abstinence a lifestyle, because in a way addiction itself is a lifestyle. So whatever you process in has got to be processed out. So the notion that there's a stopgap solution, something short term, it doesn't work. Often that has been the approach in the medical community: detoxify the person, you know, help the body get rid.
That's where you put them, like take them on in a
hospital or a rehab,
for like 3 months.
Detox. Well,
most of them come out and go straight back into it.
Well, there are two different things. There's a detox, which is a medical process, and will take anything from 3 days to 2 weeks, depending on the chemicals involved. And that's to help the body wean itself off of the chemical by stabilizing the person as the body goes through whatever it goes through in order to get rid of the chemical. But beyond that, they need to get into a program of change. Otherwise, they will go back to the drug, because that drug use is a way of coping with life. It's a way of managing, you know, all their life issues. And if they don't replace it with something else, they'll go back to it. In this sense, in fact, it becomes it's idolatry. It becomes an idol. It becomes a spiritual focus of your life. And you need to change that spiritual focus. People who are taken out of idolatry, so, actual idolatry, if it's not replaced with worship of the one and true God, they'll end up going back there when life gets tight and they run into problems and so forth. The same thing with the addict. And so this issue of positive change becomes then necessary, and it becomes then the focus of what treatment is. So it's training the person to live without their chemical or without their behavior. And like things we need to learn, it takes time. It's not overnight.
Yeah, and I love what you said. It's processed in, so it has to be processed out. Yeah. Wow, I hope you're learning a lot. I am, and also reflecting. I think when we come back, we've got to really talk about how really people, I think Albert has spoken about it, but how do we really get out of that cycle? Because we can't keep, I think they said, it's Albert Einstein, they said that you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And we're at the beginning of another year. We have promised ourselves very many things over the years, and governance is also about self as much as it is about others. So it's we need some self-governance, and we need to get into self-governance. God bless you, and see you next Monday for the final part.